Hello, grade 5 boys and girls. Today we're going to look at the scientific method. Now let's ask ourselves, what is the scientific method? Scientific method is a series of steps that scientists use to answer questions and solve problems. What are the steps of the scientific method? First, we observe and ask a question. We then form a hypothesis. Next, we plan an investigation or experiment. Then we will conduct that experiment or investigation. We next analyze the results, then draw a conclusion, and finally, we communicate our findings. Let us now look at each step that makes up the scientific method. First, observe and ask a question. We use our senses to observe our surrounding, and from what we observe, we will ask a question. Now, an example of this is you observe that when you are traveling to school on a regular basis, some days you get to school earlier than others. Now, the question that will come from this is, what is the fastest route to school? Next, hypothesis. This is a statement of a possible answer to your question. It is an explanation that must be testable. An example of this is taking the main street to Helm Street to avoid the light on Maple Avenue to school is the fastest route. That is your hypothesis from what you have observed earlier and the question you have. To test your hypothesis, we need to plan an investigation or an experiment. Now, planning an investigation takes several steps. This must be done with careful planning to ensure that the results are accurate, thus making this experiment successful. Now, after the careful planning of your experiment, you're next going to conduct that experiment. Now, be careful to ensure that you follow all the steps and procedure that you actually planned. An experiment is broken down into two parts. Part 1, materials, a list of equipment that you might need for the experiment, and second, the procedure of following the instructions carefully that you planned. Now, look at an example and we are going to continue with the route to school. Now, you drive to school at the same time each day at the same speed, taking a variety of routes. Make sure to include in the hypothesis the routes that you take. You should record each time that you travel the route. The exact time it takes from home to school must be recorded. After finishing your experiment or investigation, we are next going to analyze the results. Collection of information and data from the experiment. You may use charts, graphs, or written work. You should actually document what happened. For an example, analyzing the different route times, selecting the fastest route from home to school. And when you're documenting your data, you could actually indicate things like the traffic, the stoplights, so on. Now, after completing your investigation, analyzing your investigation, you're next going to look at your conclusion. Now, you will ask yourself the questions. Did you find the answer to the question that you initially asked? It is okay if it turns out that your hypothesis was wrong. The most important thing is that you learn from it. Did your evidence support your hypothesis? Those are the questions that you might want to ask yourself. Example: determine whether your root hypothesis was correct or not. Now for the final step in your scientific method, to communicate your findings. It is very important to actually communicate your findings, to report your findings, to store it, because in future it will help others who is actually trying to repeat your experiment. Now, for an example of this is you share the results of your test or your experiment with other members of your class or even family members at home.